We're going to learn how to make a very basic menu. There's more than one way to make a menu. There really is more than one way, but this particular way is rather common. So, and remember, we want to start from the ground up. It's good for new web developers and designers to start by building things from scratch themselves. Later on, use templates, but it is when you first start out, you're going to really want to use. You're going to want to learn how to do these things yourself. Okay. So here I have what's called an unordered list. It starts with a UL tag, and then it have elements inside of it, and called list items, LI, LI, LI. All right, and now, if you remember, if you remember about block layout and inline block and inline, you'll recall that when something has a block layout, it keeps its own space, right, on each line. And so each of these elements here are taking up one line going across, and it's forcing the next one to pop down onto the next line, right? Okay, each one is popping down because it won't share space on the same line with other elements. Because remember, in many ways, HTML is, its fundamental structure is a lot like typesetting. The way this idea that you're lining things across like this, and then it'll. At any rate, there are many concepts which are similar. So, okay, the first thing we do is, all right, I have a style sheet here. I called it menu CSS. And so the first thing we want to do is target. We want to target those items. Okay. But even before we do that, here we have an unordered list and we can. Let's say we don't want these little dots there. Okay, fine. So what we do is we come in here, and remember, an ID tag, we use the pound sign, and we have head menu, and so we say list style, and again, PHP Storm, this IDE, it immediately suggests to me list style, and I'm going to say none. And okay, so what happens there? They disappear. Then we come back here. Now we're going to do something a little different. Head menu and LI. Okay, so now what this does is it says first, when applying these styles, look into the page for the element with the ID tag, right? Because we're using the pound sign, the ID tag of head menu. And then under it, okay, one of its children, okay, something that comes inside, and I guess you can also say after it, right? So here's the UL. So, and here's the closing tag. So each one of these LIs will be considered, it's under it, right? Like a sort of within a tree or within a family. Sometimes we'll call these child elements. Sometimes they're called. So a child of the head menu, and then we're going to apply some different styles to those. Well, the first thing, let's do this. Let's say display Okay, inline block. Okay, so now those things are going to pop back up onto this okay, now you can see they said, all right, we're not going to share, we're not going to be greedy about our line going across in our HTML. We'll let other elements come up and sit next to us on the same line. Okay. And the next thing we'll do, let's give them a background color of gray. And I have some styles here that I'm going to just copy in, because, and then if you can do them yourself. Okay. Now there's one item here that is tricky, and it's well, at any rate, you'll get the idea in a second. We're going to use this float property. Well, let's see. Yeah, we'll do it that way. All right, so what we want these to do is we're going to float them left. Okay. And we're going to give these things a border. Border at the top, and you'll see why in a second. Border at the bottom, border on the left. Okay. And you can see I'm not giving one a border on the right. And the reason is because if I do that, well, let's see. Well, edit, yeah, okay, yeah, I guess I'll just show you what I mean by that. Okay. So, let's say I just gave them, this is 2 pixels, this is 2 pixels. Now, if I gave this item, this list area here, okay, and you can see now there's padding, right? I've created padding. If I gave it a border of 2, if I gave this one, the home list tag, a border of 2 pixels, you know, and I set it such that it went all around, and I also gave the services list tag a border of 2 pixels all around. And you can do that simply by specifying padding without putting in the dash bottom, dash left, etc. If I just said border 2 pixels solid, okay, then what would happen is you'd see this would be really, really thick. This would be 4 pixels because they're sitting up right next to each other, right? Okay. Now, let's say, what if I took out this? All right, so at any rate, that is why I went over here and I said I gave this a class, this last list item, I gave it a class and I called it last list item. And then what I'm going to do with that one, okay, is do this. Because I want it consistent, right? I gave that very last one a border right of 2 pixels, okay? So boom, there we go. So you can see here that I only gave it to that very last one. And remember, we use the dot to target an element in our HTML page that has a particular class designation, and here it's called last list item. Okay. Now, why did I float these over to the left? Okay. So essentially, this one is floating up against this one, and all of these, okay, on this line, they're floating this way. They're floating to this side of the page. Okay, if I didn't do that, you can see, I will comment this out, you can see that there'll be some gap in between them because they don't know exactly what to do with themselves, right? And you can't just change their margin properties to make them move left because they're just sitting there on the page. How do you explain that? Well, it's just the way the underlying architecture works. Okay. Now we're about to talk about something that is really, well, it's really important that you know how to solve this problem, and you'll see what the problem is in a minute. And okay, so we're gonna go ahead. We're gonna leave that there. Again, don't leave the video now because there's a sort of like, many people call it and refer to it as sort of like a glitch in the underlying architecture. Okay, and it has to do with what's called clearing floats. Okay, but at any rate, let's put in some more styles here. So now we're going to let's change the color of that text. Let's change the color of the text a little here. So I targeted head menu, a child element inside a head, an A, which is an anchor tag, text decoration. If you remember what that is this underline. And I'm also going to change the color. Okay, I changed it to antique white. Okay, so that looks a lot better, right? Now I want to add some. I want the background. I want the user to receive some feedback. That, you know, that's always a good thing. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to put in here. Head menu, list item, and remember, again, these videos, all of these videos in this HTML CSS3 group, right? They all have the same graphic on them. They go together and they build on each other, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, etc. So it's best if you watch them in order from the start, 1, 2, 3, 4, because I'm going to be referring to things that we've already covered. So I put a colon in there, and then I specify hover, and that is a behavior. When my mouse is hovering over it, I want the background color to be dark cyan. Okay, so all right, I did that. Now, what's the next thing? Okay, so now what we're going to do here, here's the problem I was talking about before. Okay, and let's say that we have over here in our HTML file, okay, over here in our HTML file, let's imagine that we have here a box with some text, okay, where I talk about some products, etc. Now, what's going to happen? This is the problem of clearing floats. Okay, I'm gonna refresh. Okay, and what happened? All our text went over there. Oh, first I'll give it a few styles. You say, why did that happen? I have a div tag, and you're probably remembering, hey, wait a minute. These have a default display property of block. So all of this text, because it's in a div tag, you'd normally think, hey, it should start down here. It should start down here. It should pop down onto its own line because it doesn't want to share space. Well, that's what happens when you float an element, okay? what happens is the things that follow it all of a sudden develop a kind of boundary problem, as it were. It's like your neighbors, they see you floating left and floating right, and all of a sudden they're running into your space. They're running up into your space. They're in your yard. You want them to get them back on your own yard. Well, first what I'm going to do, all right, I'm going to add some styles with the box of text before we go ahead and solve this problem. Okay, there's the box with the text. Well, let's do it this way. I'm going to put it right here. Easier to see it. So I gave this box, now I'm going to gave it a width of 500, height of 300, padding right there, a dashed line, and a margin of 20 at the top. Okay, and you go, hey, wait, it's still got weird boundary problems. This is crazy. This is unacceptable. What's going on? Okay, so what you do to, I guess you could say, reactivate the rules that normally apply, and believe me, usually this sort of thing doesn't happen this often in CSS and HTML, but once you figure this out, or you don't have to figure it out, once you know how to fix this glitch within the underlying architecture, you will, well, it's going to be good news. You're going to really want to do it. All right, so here's what I did. Here are these floated elements, right? Okay, they're all floating up next to each other. You can create in the parent element, you can call this class anything. We're going to do what's called a clearfix, all right? So there, okay, I target this wrapper element right here. Okay, it contains the floats, and then I use this pseudo class of after, and what this does, this is a behavior that puts something here. It's nothing. I mean, it won't show on the page. You put something after the element that will then you give it a display of block, and you assign to it clear both. Okay, all right, so you're clearing floats to the left, you're clearing floats to the right, and you're doing it after. Okay, now here's the thing, you don't need to understand why the architecture itself has this problem. The fundamental HTML, CSS page layout structure. There are countless authors that state that, you know, this is one of the worst. It's uselessly complex. It's not. It's sort of almost like a bug or glitch that was created by the designers themselves. Okay. Now you can see. All of a sudden, this div tag, you know, and I gave it a dashed line. This div tag, this div element, right, a neighbor to my menu, to my unordered list, all of a sudden now it doesn't have boundary problems anymore. It's got its head straight, and it's going to go back to the rules that normally always apply in HTML pages, that a div tag, unless you tell it otherwise, unless you assign it a quality of inline block or inline, it will default to a block layout. Okay? Now, some things like images have a natural inline display property. And so you'll have to remember that. But it will become apparent when you start laying out your page and you see your image go up here, right? Okay? You will see that. Now, I suppose to make that look a little better, what we could do is give it a margin left of, I don't know, 85 pixels. Okay. And All right, so again, all you need to remember is this. You need to, if you start floating items, the things that follow them on the page will all of a sudden start misbehaving. If you do a search, I've read many books on CSS and I've watched other people's tutorials and taken courses, free online courses, as some of them are paid. I've in the past I've even paid. It's okay, whatever. But you don't need to really. But at any rate, in all these different places, time and time again, different authors, real authorities on writing front-end web design code will tell you that this is. You just do a Google search. They'll, why are floats and CSS so complex, or the problem with floats, or those things. You'll see that it's not something you want to spend too much time trying to understand, other than that it just exists and you have to clear it. And now if I put in another div tag down here, I wouldn't have to worry about that anymore. Okay, so you need to know how to handle that. Okay, now again, I'm not, there are many other ways to make menus, and there's, for example, here's a bootstrap menu on a website that I built, and there's lots of, as things go on, you will find that there are lots of different ways of making menus, and let me show you another. For example, here I've got a drop down, and here I'm using JavaScript, right? So if you watch very closely, here's a drop down menu, and you can see there's only one. Do you see another drop down? No. Okay, so I'll select one drop down menu, and boom, based on what I chose up here, a new one will drop down here. Here, information, kindergarten, universities. Now let's say I chose casual reading. Okay, oh, boom. So I'm with JavaScript, I'm changing those menus. And we can also, for example, here's a website I created. This one also uses JavaScript jQuery to affect the slow, right? You can see how it does that. Lots of different ways to create menus, and we're going to go into that on this channel, and I'll walk you step by step through that. But again, you need to be able to build the basics from scratch first.